Thanks so much for everyone joining us today. My name is Michael Fisher. I am the Faith Partnerships lead here at Free Will, and I am excited to be joined by my friend and colleague Brenda Moore, and I'm looking forward to learning from her today. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping things to take care of. First, the recording and the slides from today's presentation will be shared with you through email after our call. This event is also eligible for CFRE credit. And if this is something that you're working towards or maybe working towards in the future, we've added a question checkbox in the survey so we can keep track of your participation on your behalf if you'd like that. Just go ahead and mark that in the survey that we'll send out after the chat so we can keep that record for you. Our agenda for today, start off with introductions. Then I'll hand the mic over to our expert. Brenda Moore is going to talk about legacy giving basics for faith communities. And this is something that is very close to my heart. I spent the first 11 years of my career in vocational ministry, teaching biblical stewardship and plan giving and serving as a development director. And the reason that I came to Free Will is to provide the opportunity for technology and ministry to be connected very well and to unlock millions of dollars for kingdom ministry to be funded. And I spend my days working with church leaders, ministry leaders, and have a team of folks with ministry backgrounds here at Free Will, serving around 500 faith partners of our 2,300 partners at the company. This is probably the least that you'll hear about Free Will because this is not a sales presentation, but I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the company. We're the number one estate planning and plan giving solution in the US, trusted by 2,300 nonprofits. Some organizations, I know, recognize some names on the call. Thank you for being our partners and for trusting us to help you grow your ministry. Our team has so far generated $13.2 billion for nonprofits in gift commitments and dollars committed in asset-based gifts. We partner with over 500 ministries. Together have 6 centuries of combined fundraising experience, and we've done the math, about 100 years of ministry leadership experience on our team. So we truly have a heart for serving the church and look forward to working with you today. After the call, we will be sending out a gift in the mail. So if you're interested in receiving a copy of a great book, Not Your Parents' Offering Plate, great opportunity to look at what it means to impart some of these principles into your congregation. We'll send you one of these. Just mark a note in the survey if you'd like to be entered in that drawing, and we'll send those out through the mail. Now, most important, introducing our special guest. I first met Brenda at the Association of Christian Fundraising Conference 4 or 5 years ago. And when I heard her speak and I saw her display at her booth and then got to speak with her on a personal level, it was one of those situations, and I'm sure most of you have had it, where you know that when you're talking with someone, you've spent time with someone who is like Jesus, and her passion for the church and her passion for equipping and teaching others is the reason why we invited her here today. She has walked the talk. She sat in most of your shoes, had many of your roles, and now serves as a preeminent educator and someone who will be able to guide you through this process. So that's enough of me talking for now. I'm going to end my screen share, hand it over to Brenda, and let her teach us for the next 40 minutes.
Thank you, Michael. Now here comes the trickiest part because I've got to be able to share my screen with you, right? And I'm more of I'm more of an immigrant into this world of technology. So you can just confirm for me that when I hit this button, you will begin to see my slides. Is that true?
Yes, we can see your slides. And my last comment, I said I'd hand this off. If you do have questions, feel free and use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window or enter the questions in the chat. We do have some moderators here from Free Will, and we'll have some time at the end to answer questions as possible.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael. I just want to say how much it means to me to be invited to do this, in part because I have been a student of free will and of all of the webinars that you've shared from the beginning of time. And I have learned so much from all of the webinars that I take in through free will. And so I'm just really honored to be included as a presenter for today, and really honored by the attendance. So thanks so much for being here. I will say the very fact that you're with us today tells me that you care very deeply about the future of the churches and the ministries and the people that you lead and serve. And I really honor you for that. I can't wait to dive into this subject with you because I am so committed to legacy giving at this stage of my life and my career. And if anything, maybe some of my enthusiasm will be contagious today. That's one of the things I hope for. And so I can kind of imagine what prompted you to be here today. I know some of you are clergy who want to learn how to lead on this subject, and others of you are staff or lay people who are charged with growing your church's endowment, and maybe you just don't know where to start. Maybe you're the executive director of a nonprofit that hasn't started a legacy giving program yet, but you have donors who are ready to make these kinds of gifts. Or maybe you're the director of development and this whole plan giving thing is a big learning curve for you. But no matter who you are and what your situation is, if I had to guess, I'd say your participation here has something to do with the future. Some possibility you see, some opportunity you don't want to miss, some community of people you want to serve, a next generation that needs your church, your ministry walking alongside them. You must have some commitment to a future down the road because, as we know, many of these legacy gifts don't come into our possession until someone dies down the road. So let's think about the future of your ministry for a minute. I don't want to spend too long on this theme because it isn't even biblical, but do you worry at least a little bit about the future of your ministry? Do you wonder how your organization can really thrive when everything about the world is changing so quickly, and with so many churches and institutions closing their doors? Maybe you even worry about your ministry's survival. It's not an easy time to be in ministry, that's for sure. And in fact, this particular article appeared on the front page of my local newspaper here in Minnesota 7 years ago. This was before COVID. And we've seen even more church closings since then. It's really sobering stuff, especially for those of us who've spent a whole lifetime committed to funding ministry. And so, I know there's just a whole lot of pressure to have resources to fund ministry today, and sometimes just to keep the doors open. And that pressure can really completely blind us to both the possibilities of the future, and I would also say the responsibilities of the future. And if we think about it for too long, this decline in faith-based institutions, then we start asking some deeply personal questions. We begin to wonder, what does this mean for my family? What's it going to mean for my kids? What does this mean for the whole family of God? And while these ministries I care so deeply about, will they even be here to walk alongside my great-grandchildren one day? And the people in my community and my global neighbor, we can easily fret about these things because they're kind of real. I hope, though, you're paying attention to what's happening in the world around us, because this really got my attention just 2 months ago. This is a sign of great hope, and there are lots of signs of hope that are beginning to emerge. But this is a Christianity Today article from September 5th. It highlighted the recent research from Barna Group and Glue, And they're finding now this post-pandemic surge among Gen Z, my kids, that they are the more prolific churchgoers than any other generation now. And it's not to say that church attendance has improved or that it's the only metric, but Barna is calling this shift now not only historic, but they're calling it a generational reversal. And so, this is the kind of data that represents really good news for those of us who are church leaders. I think it also helps us be encouraged by the very reasons that we think about legacy giving and legacy giving work in the first place. And, we're, as people of faith, we need to just stop for a minute and set aside the worries about the future of our ministries. Let's remind ourselves what God's already doing about it. God reminds us that we're not going to be left hanging. God reminds us that we will have more than enough to do what needs to be done. And one more thing that's crystal clear to me is that God has given us more than enough human potential for doing good things. For more than 40 years now, I've been blessed to work with some incredible faith leaders like you, executive directors, presidents, development directors, pastors, board members, church council members, fundraising volunteers. I've worked with them in their $100 million campaigns and their little $10,000 projects and everything in between. And I've seen them and you accomplish some amazing things. And the reason I remind you of this is because for so many people, legacy giving feels kind of out of reach. It sometimes can feel too hard. I've seen these faith leaders like yourself face, honestly, some of the same obstacles about money and ministry over and over again. And they are some of the same obstacles I faced early in my own career. And I want to share some of these with you because my gut tells me you can relate and identify with some of these obstacles. And let's just name them and then move beyond them. But when I was early career in this work, the first obstacle I faced was a lack of confidence. I asked myself every day, God wants me to ask people for money because I was, what, 22 at the time when I started this work right out of college. Um, and I fought God on this for a long time until I realized it wasn't about me. I wasn't inviting gifts for me. I was inviting gifts for the benefit of others. I was inviting gifts for God's kingdom. And that's why they call it philanthropy. It's about the love of humankind. And inviting gifts for God's work isn't greedy. It's not self-serving. It's noble, God honoring work. But it took me a while, and maybe it's taken you a while to get that and to pursue this work with confidence. Um, I I also faced capacity obstacles. The small ministry organizations I first served relied totally on charitable gift income, and some months barely enough capacity to pay their staff, including me. And I did not fully appreciate the real capacity for giving that our donors had, much less how to help them share it. Um, and then my lack of competence was also a big obstacle. It didn't take too long to learn the ropes of things that are less complex, like events and direct mail and phonathons and some of the techniques that we used to use to encourage giving. But the more sophisticated stuff, the major gifts and planned giving work, early career, I didn't even know what I didn't know about those things, right? So thank goodness I got connected to Christian colleagues and mentors and consultants who helped me grow in my competence. And I'm eternally grateful to the extraordinary, faithful people, a couple of them in this webinar who accompanied me as I developed my skills for engaging the capacity of my donors. And I don't even know where I'd be if it were for the people who had more confidence in me than I even had in myself at the time. So I share this because if you're experiencing some similar obstacles about money and ministry, just know that you're not alone. I'm here for you. Michael's here for you. There are a great cloud of witnesses in this work that want to be your guide. And I just want you to recognize that God has given you more than enough competence, capacity, and confidence here at this intersection of faith and philanthropy. And my highest goal for you, even in this short webinar, will be that you come away with this sense that you have what you need to take the next steps in this work. Okay. Um, so let's kind of get started with just kind of framing a few basic ideas. Okay. And the first basic concept is this idea about, or this term, legacy giving. What is it anyway? And I suspect that you might be maybe more familiar with the term planned giving. The nonprofit sector uses the term planned gift to describe gifts that are given from assets instead of cash. And planned gifts do require more effort and intentionality than the simplicity of writing a check or using a credit card. But I like the comparable term legacy gift simply because it says more about what planned gifts accomplish. And when I use the word legacy, I don't want you to think about something you leave behind. I want you to think about something you pass forward because it's through our legacy gifts that we play a role in passing on the legacy of faith to future generations, passing on a legacy of love for the neighbor near and far. That's why I use the word legacy giving. Now, I've got a few illustrations ahead to kind of introduce you to some of the main ideas that it's helpful to understand if you're just moving into this work or if you need a refresher. And let's just start with these two buckets. So these two buckets represent one of the most important realities that will drive your work in legacy giving. When I first started using these buckets and actually carrying these buckets around the country to places like the ACF conference where I met Michael, I was first using these buckets as an illustration of one of the most important distinctions between um, wealth and wealth held in cash and wealth held in non-cash assets. At the time we started using these buckets, the small bucket represented the 10% of the wealth in this country that was held in cash and regular income. And the big bucket represented the 90% of the wealth in this country that was held in accumulated assets. And so now think retirement funds, real estate, stock. Okay, that's what's in the big bucket. Now, today, those numbers are even further apart. Get this, 2.3% of the average household's wealth is held in cash. 97.7% of household wealth is held in assets. And honestly, the older I get, the more I see how that works. You will probably recognize the name if you've been doing free will webinars in the past, and you should continue to do them. They're great. You've met one of the industry's most trusted gurus and researchers, and his name is Professor Russell James. He provided these updated numbers in a post just yesterday, and he did it with a quote that I love, and I want to share it with you. He said, "Fundraising that focuses only on cash is stuck in the kiddie pool. Major gifts of assets, also known as planned gifts, move you into the ocean." I love that visual. So the next time you watch me do this presentation, I will have changed out my buckets for a kiddie pool and an ocean. Okay. um, that's exactly the most fundamental point of just understanding what kind of wealth is driving legacy giving, and how we need to start thinking about it. And and let's stop and admit that the church has been Most comfortable in the kiddie pool. Um, the ways that most of faith communities that I've worked with over time have talked about generosity kind of have them stuck in the small bucket approach to giving. And sure, we might promote the biblical principles of tithing or of proportional giving, but a tithe or a proportion of what? Well, income, the small bucket. That's what we've been talking with our members and our friends about. We've been training the typical person in the pew to think only about the small bucket, and we remind them to think that way every time the plate comes around and they reach into their pocket for some cash or a check, or every time we give them a QR code for a gift from their what? Their checking account, right? We have not been inviting gifts from the big bucket. We haven't helped our donors know that the big bucket is even an option. And in fact, let's be honest, most ministry leaders don't understand the big bucket and aren't even scratching the surface of our members' potential for generosity. So, your ministry needs a legacy giving program so that your faithful friends and members can give from this 97.7%. And more importantly, so that your mission can be more sustainable, have that further reach, that your vision for your ministry can be fulfilled. If you are really going to move the needle on ministry, you need to invite gifts from the big bucket. And Dr. James would say, and he also is a man of great faith. It's one of the reasons I love to follow him. He would say, you have to get out of the kiddie pool and into the ocean. So that's what we're looking at when we're looking at legacy giving programs. Now, here is another illustration I want to talk about for just a minute, again, to kind of give you the shape and the context of what this work is about. One of the most common questions I've gotten asked for years from ministry leaders is this. They ask, Brenda, why aren't we getting more of these gifts? We hear about the great wealth transfer. We hear about these beautiful gifts that our church-related college down the street is getting. We hear these other stories, but we aren't seeing these gifts here. And so I share this visual to help you understand. The primary answer to this question is, well, because you aren't inviting them. Okay, that's the honest truth. But let's just look at where these gifts are going. So do you see the jar to the far right that's filled to overflowing? Think about that jar representing charitable income that a typical college and university receives in bequests and other gifts at death. Um, that in many cases, these colleges and universities and the people and organizations who've been doing legacy giving for a long time are getting maybe 20% of their total gift income. If you follow the Council for the Advancement and Support of Education case, I'm actually doing some research now and doing a whole separate webinar series with some of my higher ed clients. And we're looking specifically at the impact of bequests on total gift revenue, 20%. It's very typical for the organizations that have been doing this well for a long time. Can you imagine if through your bequests, through gifts, through wills alone, you had 20% more income for ministry? That takes you into a whole new level of visioning. And so that jar really represents these institutions who have been working on their legacy giving programs over many years in some cases. Now, the jar in the middle represents charitable income that the average nonprofit receives and bequests through wills at death. According to Giving USA, that number is typically like 8 to 9%. That's the total income from wills and bequests every year. We've been in that zone for many, many years. So that's the jar in the middle. Now, um, uh, that sorry jar on the left that has just a little bit of change in it, that really represents what every other type of nonprofit is receiving in bequest income. And unfortunately, it includes a lot of organizations, especially like churches and a lot of organizations in the religion sector. It's clearly something far less than 8 or 9% average. And if I were to poll this group right now, which I'm not prepared to do today, I'm guessing that very few of you would be able to identify much bequest income at all that you're receiving. And if it is, you probably can't imagine even the average 8 to 9%. But the capacity is there. It's there. We know it's there. It's just not necessarily coming into our jar, and we've got to start taking some responsibility for that. Excuse me one second. Now, I'm afraid that planned giving has been an unnecessarily intimidating form of fundraising for a long time, even to the extent that seasoned development professionals have avoided planned giving. They'd rather do some other form of fundraising because the terms can be intimidating, the concepts can feel complicated. Um, and there are regulations involved with this work, any giving work for that matter. But some of the complexities have scared off even the most confident and well-intentioned people. And the first thing I want to do is start by taking all of the intimidating terms out of the equation and breaking the kinds of gifts that are legacy gifts into three simple ways of thinking about them. There are essentially three basic ways to make a legacy gift. And you don't have to know any other jargon other than what I'm going to teach you right now in order to be able to talk about these gifts, because honestly, your donors won't understand the jargon either. This is the way they're going to be able to understand the kinds of gifts that legacy gifts are. So, the most common type of legacy gift is a give later gift. And this, in fact, is probably the most common type of gift, Michael, that people are planning when they come into the free will site and make a plan to put your ministry organization into their will. These are gifts that people plan for now, but they won't be given until later. And most often, when the donor is confident that they won't need the asset anymore, and that's typically at the time of their death. So donors like these give later kinds of gifts because they retain control of their assets. They can use their assets throughout their lifetime until they don't need them anymore. And these again are often the gifts left through will. They're the most common by far. This is the kind of work that free will is doing so extraordinarily well, helping people make simple gifts through their wills we call bequests. Now, more often these gifts that are given, I mean, they also through the will is one way, but more and more leaving a gift through a beneficiary designation form that you can simply download online is also incredibly common. These are very, very simple ways of being able to plan for the ministry that you love. They're easy to understand. They're easy to explain. And again, 80 to 90% of legacy gifts are either gifts that pass through will or through beneficiary designation. And if you know how to talk about these and invite these without understanding even the more complex gifts, you will be able to help 80 to 90% of your friends make a gift that they long to make and would love to make for your ministry. So those are give later gifts. The next two, give now. These are actually becoming more common, and they're a little more complicated, but not much. And so these are legacy gifts where you can give now with a gift that someone gives, like typically to an endowment fund or a donor advised fund. And those gifts, you can actually make gifts to those funds now. And then those funds, an endowment fund or a donor advised fund, provide current gifts to ministry, but they're also set up so that they can make gifts at the end of your life, right? So a lot of people establish these funds with gifts now, a lot of times through gifts of stock or appreciated securities. I'm not going to do the donor advised fund presentation here. If you want to learn about donor advised funds, Again, free will provides the best education and updated information about donor advised funds. I think that was the presentation just this past Tuesday, right, Michael? And so people can start these funds, these endowments, or these donor advised funds now with gifts now, but then these funds will be able to continue to make gifts either at the time of their death, sometimes beyond death. So that's a give now kind of gift. And then the third type of legacy gift is what I call a give and receive gift. And this is less common, but these are gifts that you can give now or even at death that provide an income either to yourself or to others. And so if you hear people talking about things like gift annuities or charitable trusts, these are the give and receive types of gifts. Some of these gifts don't require significant planning. Others, like a trust, really do. And you'll have a bunch of advisors involved with you if you're going to set up a charitable trust. But again, for you to remember, give later, give now, give and receive. Those are the way these funds work. Now, before we dive into this framework, let me tell you that I spent years trying to help interpret what I'll call the ecosystem for planned giving to the typical layperson or to the typical volunteer or even to the typical executive director. The planned giving ecosystem can feel very overwhelming. And so um, it, I wanted to be able to somehow interpret it in a far less complicated way because I had experienced the struggle with planned giving. I've worked with too many ministries and other organizations that just don't know where to start, or they get started and they stall. Most often they stall when it comes to securing gifts for the fund. We'll get to that in a moment. But so after years of using planned giving's best practices, I developed this legacy giving program because I wanted to shorten the learning curve for people like you who wanted to be doing this work. And so I synthesized and simplified everything that I've learned. I collected and refined and reduced all of my resources to the most important practical pieces of information and content that people need. And I've put it together in an online course and put it together in a coaching program. Again, the intent was that you and no one else should have to reinvent this wheel. And I use the word legacy as an acronym for the six basic components of a legacy giving program. And so I'm going to just walk you through those six main pieces with hopes that you'll be able to, again, try to shrink the vast ecosystem of plan giving into something that is a model that you can hang your hat on and start doing your planning and implementation around. And so we're going to talk through leadership, education, gifts, administration, communication, and you. And hopefully, as you start doing this work, you can remember that framework again because legacy, the acronym, helps us know exactly where we need to keep our focus. All right. So um, I'm just going to introduce you to things at the high level. You might need to take some notes at this point, or again, Michael will send you the recording and you can get more of it there. But let's start with leadership. Um, no one person, no development director, no stewardship leader, no one person can be the sole champion or the only person who cares about this work. The ownership for legacy giving needs to start, like any other good fundraising, um, in at your board table, whether that is the governing board of a nonprofit or whatever you call the governing board of your congregation, your faith community, whoever those lead stakeholders are, really need to own your legacy giving program. And they need to own it for the long haul. One of the things that you may already know or have figured out is that legacy giving work is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It is not a peer-based fundraising kind of effort where you do a short campaign and it's done. Today, if you are a Minnesotan, today is Give to the Max Day here in Minnesota. It's our monthly giving day. And if you hear my phone going off in the background, it's, I think every time I get a notification from one of the charities I love, it's asking me to do something for Give to the Max Day. But it's asking me to do something where I can just tap a button, make a click, and make a gift. Legacy giving doesn't work that way. It's marathon kinds of work, and your governing board needs to be committed to the marathon because, again, so many of these gifts aren't going to materialize until after somebody passes. And you hope that that's a long time from now. Okay. There are two leadership steps that are the most critical pieces for you to be very intentional about. One is getting your governing board's approval, and that includes, first of all, identifying the right legacy giving leaders in your organization. I always say two are better than one, two champions. In my course, I go into great detail about that. But identifying the right leaders, presenting the legacy giving program and an actual proposal to your governing board to get them to adopt this program, this pursuit of yours. And this governing board also needs to take formal action on a resolution to establish your program. If it isn't owned at that table, it's not going to have the long-term traction that it needs. So governing board approval is one. And then establishing a legacy giving work group is two. And why do I call it a work group? Well, first of all, I want to point out the fact that this is not like a rubber stamp kind of an organization that just sits back and counts the money. Okay. This legacy giving work group, it, it needs to have an appropriate name for your organization. Maybe you have committees, maybe you have task forces. Um, I call it a work group because you want to identify prospective participants for this group that actually are willing to work all year long, year round. And it may be, it may not be a heavy lift for them, but it needs to be consistent. And so, around that table, do you want to have, if you're fortunate to have them, an estate planning attorney, a financial advisor, a marketing person who can help communicate your story? You bet. When you establish this work group, they're going to have and need regular series of meetings, an introductory meeting to get them all set up. The most important thing this work group is going to do is develop a vision and a purpose for your legacy gifts. And so it starts with leadership. And step number one, great leadership. Step number two to legacy giving is education. And this is kind of closely tied to what we were just talking about. I'll just say congratulations because if you're sitting in on this webinar, you already know how important legacy giving education is. And there are really two audiences of learners that we're helping here in this education step. And it's leader education. We're educating leaders and we're clearly educating our donors. So when we talk about educating our leaders, I think there are kind of three primary things that we're looking at. First of all, having a good rhythm and system in place for leadership orientation so that people can get onboarded to your work group with, again, the competence and the confidence that you need so everybody around the table feels equipped. Another important step for leader education is just being able to provide or encourage people to participate in webinars and seminars, and that's that year-round learning that is so helpful. And again, even if you just simply get on Free Will's mail list and start getting all of the announcements for their webinars, you will learn so much. You'll learn the lion's share of what you need to know about how these kinds of gifts work. And so be sure that you're helping your legacy giving leaders learn all throughout the year. There are so many great online resources. Again, if you know the Free Will website, you're going to find lots of great online resources for your education there. I love the National Christian Foundation's online web pages because they have such great stories about their donors, and those stories do a great job of helping to teach people how these gifts work. I've got a weekly newsletter where I try to pump out content all the time that's simple and practical, and so you can certainly sign up for that. So leader education is super important. And then I would also argue, maybe even more important, it's educating your donors. And one of the reasons that donors don't make legacy gifts is because they don't know anything about them. And so the goal of your education plan is simply to help people understand that these gifts exist, that anyone can consider them. They don't have to be wealthy. In fact, the more important metric for a legacy giver is loyalty. And you need to have a year-round education plan so that your donors, when they have what I call a triggering event, and this is a whole nother separate session in the course that I teach, but when there is a triggering event in their life that sends them back to the drawing board on their will or on their estate plan, you want to be front of mind. That's the most important thing you're educating for. You want to help trigger the donor's need and their desire to include you in their plans when that triggering event occurs. A lot of times, one of the steps in donor education is a seminar. And we've used seminars successfully in our year-round planning for education. And so the key there is follow-up. Absolutely follow up. In the course, I have again a whole section on being able to deliver a great legacy giving seminar. So education is step two. Step three, gifts. Gifts are the most important outcome of the legacy giving program. All of those other all of those other keys to legacy giving set the stage for effective gift work, but it's only through inviting and receiving new gifts that your ministry is going to grow and you'll be able to expand your scope in terms of what your legacy giving program can do. It's kind of blunt, but I often say no money, no mission. And, unfortunately, this is the stage where a lot of ministries struggle. This is the place where they get stuck. Here's what I often see. This maybe sounds familiar to you, but churches, ministry organizations, they establish an endowment fund with maybe an initial gift, and it might be modest. And that's fabulous. That's wonderful. We want that. And they organize an endowment committee and they find a few ways to promote the fund, but they they really don't have any idea if they're getting any real traction with their donors because they're not talking to their donors. And then they don't see any new gifts appear. And these same committees start getting frustrated because the distributions they make from these funds are modest and don't grow. And so, I'm determined that with as high as the capacity is for these gifts, we have to help one another grow in our level of comfort and conviction about inviting gifts for these funds. And so that's my challenge for you. Don't lose any time in learning how to do this gift work. And so there are two stages here. And again, without going into any detail in this particular session about them, you really are looking at two things. You want to discover the legacy gifts that exist. Those are the gifts that maybe have already come to you in the past, but it's also identifying the people who are most likely prospects for legacy gifts. And I encourage the use of a survey that helps you initially ascertain if some of those gifts are already in your pipeline. And then when you're inviting new gifts, now we move into the arena of needing to have one-on-one visits. I think there are three important steps in this stage, and that is, having work group members who actually know how to work with donor prospects. It's helping cultivate the prospect's interest, their knowledge, and it is conducting these personal visits and doing follow-up work to help people make these gifts that they want to make. So this is where a lot of organizations that get their legacy giving program set up, because this is where there tends to be kind of a higher learning curve. This is where they tend to reach out and establish a next level of engagement with somebody who can coach them through like some of the best practices for making legacy gifts. Administration is the next key, and this really comes down to two things. It comes down to governing policies and stewardship processes. And and the, it really aligns with two other words, and I use the words risk and responsibility. And I want you to remember that at least 80% of these legacy gifts are these give later gifts. Um, those plans can change. Those plans are revocable. There's one of the big words, but the donor can change their mind. And that it's great for donors because they retain that flexibility, but you as a ministry need to find ways of being able to stay in communication, continue relationships of trust with these donors. If you've got great administration policies and great stewardship practices, now you're fostering the trust that is going to keep those legacy gifts in the donor's plan, in your pipeline. And ultimately, this is where the administration step is most important. The governing policies that I talk about in the course and in my coaching are there are basically three of them. And those policies are gift acceptance policies, the gifts we will say yes to, the gifts we will say no to. It also includes unrestricted bequest policies. Those are gifts that come to us at the end of life with no strings attached. We need to have an internal policy about what we're going to do with those because there's a lot of different things that could happen to an unrestricted bequest, and you need a plan and a policy for what you're going to do with those gifts. And then the third policy you need is an investment and distribution policy. And that is basically a policy that addresses how you earn money for the fund and how you spend money from the fund. Okay. And those are policies, again, that I've developed some templates for that are a part of this course that when you start from scratch, they are really hard to put together. Communication, let's just say that people really don't want to talk or like to talk about death. And so the tone that you set, how you communicate about this is really important because, we're people of faith. We're actually not afraid of death, right? This is what we're living for, is that life that we get to have, that eternal life that we're looking forward to. But still, people don't like to talk about death, and we've got to have a good communication plan that helps present legacy giving as this life-giving, joy-filled decision that is part of our stewardship. And so we really need to focus on two kinds of communication. I talk about donor-focused promotions because we have to think about it from the donor's perspective. And then we also have to just admit that there's a whole nother set of influencers here that we need to be communicating with. I shouldn't say admit, but there's very intentional work that we can and should be doing with the advisors who are walking alongside our legacy givers, our members, our friends. And so, what it means to be connecting and communicating with professional advisors, again, means that you've got to have a really solid plan for how you connect with them, putting together a solid list of people you can trust and walk alongside in this work, making sure that you introduce your program to these advisors and having a good referral system. So those are two communication pieces. Communicating with your donors and their advisors is an incredibly important and specific part of this work. And then finally, you What has Jesus told us? We are the light of the world. We are the salt of the earth. And you are a city on a hill. You are critical to getting this work done. And I will say the best way that you can learn about this is to plan your own gift. Because as you go through that process, as you learn what that experience is like for you and move through the steps of that experience, you're going to be much more effective in how you communicate with others. And then the you step is also, again, about cultivating your continued competence, your continued confidence. And again, I think this is where partners like Free Will are extraordinarily helpful. The other goal that I have for people as a part of this piece of the framework is that you would experience this gift planning exercise for yourself as a part of your faith story, and that you feel like eventually you can share it with others, because in doing so, you're not only sharing your faith and your faith story around this important work, but you're also just connecting with people on a peer-to-peer level in such a way that they know and hopefully feel like they can talk with you privately and in a trusting kind of conversation as they need help or encouragement along the way. And so we talk in this framework at the end specifically about what this means for you. So these are the six parts: leadership, education, gifts, administration, communication, and you. That's the framework. That's taking that over complex ecosystem and trying to bust it down to these six primary steps with some sub steps. And one of the things that I mentioned, I do. This is an online course that I have that people can participate in. I discovered early on when I offered this course that people would get started and then they wouldn't finish. And so I started, at my whole purpose for developing the course is so that this work is getting done, right? So I started adding complementary group coaching to the course. And so inquiring minds want to know, it's a $495 course. There are 7 modules. It's got about 100 downloadable resources, many of which you can just simply replicate. And that includes things from policies to donor stories to worksheets to you name it. We're going to start our next group coaching session in the middle of January. And I think that if you're interested in pursuing this, I think this is going to be something that Michael attaches to the follow-up email that you'll get. I'll also just quickly say that for organizations that are ready to take this to the next level and need kind of a more personalized approach to how this work will happen in their organization, the other thing that I do a lot of then is one-on-one coaching, and that involves basically something that's customized for you. But enough about that. I don't want to promote too much here. If you do want to just call me or connect on a Zoom meeting with me and tell me what your obstacles are and the problems you're facing or the opportunities. If you just want to connect with me, I offer a free consultation to anybody who reaches out. And Michael, thank you for putting the QR code in there so you can take a picture of that and share it. But I hopefully have talked fast enough so that we have about 6 minutes left for any questions that have come up. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so we can answer those. And I don't know, Michael, if you want to tee some of those up, because I hope some of them are for you too.
Thank you, Brenda. This is a feeling that I have at conferences a lot, where I feel like I've just been drinking from a fire hose. I need to
Fire
wipe my
hose.
body off and dry off.
Right.
What a wonderful session today. Let's see. If
Thanks.
you have questions, you can drop them in the chat. I'm not seeing. I see one. It's more of a housekeeping. Do you have a brochure template to share that Wendy asked?
As a part of my course, yeah, I've got multiple brochure templates and actually a whole way of teaching you how to do the right kind of brochure. Because I work with a lot of really bad brochures that are institutionally focused and not donor focused. And that's the biggest key. That's the biggest difference. This brochure needs to be something that a volunteer can actually use in a conversation with a donor. It needs to be something that a donor can take to their advisor. In my course, I talk about it passing the smell test because it has to be something that is professional in the eyes of the advisor, in the eyes of the maybe overprotective children.
Mhm.
And if this brochure is all about your ministry and it's not addressing the concerns of your donor, then you kind of lose before you get started.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everyone for joining today. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A. I imagine that there are plenty of thoughts and ideas going through your head. I'd encourage you, one, we're going to send a survey out after the webinar. In the survey, if you'd like to win a copy of this book, if it's not already on your shelf, check that box and let us know, and we'll send you, if you win, we'll send a copy of that out to you in the mail. If you are looking for resources, Free Will is here to help. There's an option in there to schedule a call with our team. If you indicate that, someone from our team will reach out and we'll be able to chat with you through Zoom about how we may be able to help you with technology to start to move and to receive some assets from the ocean for your ministry. And then finally, I'd like to invite you to join us on December 9th. We work with around 2,200 nonprofit organizations, and I focus specifically on the faith-based organizations. But every other week, so about twice a month, we have webinars where it's educational focus, not a sales pitch. I invite you to come and join those and learn the best practices of the secular nonprofits, because your donors may be giving to those places as well. And their heart is typically more connected with ministries. If you have creative ideas, or if you have content like this that you think would be worth sharing with ministry leaders, feel free to reach out to me. My email, LinkedIn is on here. And again, if you'd like to learn more about how you can partner with Free Will, the next step would be to reply to that survey and indicate your interest. Thanks for joining us today. And thank you for committing your lives and your work to growing the kingdom. Brenda, do you have anything to say before I close this in prayer?
Just to underscore what you just said, boy, your partnership in this work is so important. And again, just honored to be a part of the journey with you.
All right, let's pray.
Mhm.
God of all wisdom and generosity, we pause in gratitude for the time we've shared today. You have entrusted each of us with the communities we serve, stories to honor, and gifts to steward for the good of others. We ask that the insights offered in this webinar and the practices will strengthen our legacy giving in our ministries, guide us towards clarity, courage, and faithfulness. Teach each of us to lead with confidence, so to serve with compassion, and to help those we walk beside live lives of purpose that extend well beyond themselves.
Mm.
Now go with us as we return to our work in our communities. May what we have learned today shape the way that we serve, give, and lead. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining us. I see a couple questions in the chat about the copy of the presentation. Again, we'll send that out to everyone through email. Thank you for joining us, and I appreciate you.